The storm rolled across the New Mexico territory like God's own fury, turning the August afternoon of 1878 into something dark and biblical. And that was when Samuel Brennan first saw her standing in the middle of the wildflower meadow with paint-stained fingers and rain streaming down her face like she had been born from the tempest itself. He had been riding hard from Lincoln, trying to outrun the weather, and the memories that town held for him now that the violence had finally settled into an uneasy peace. The range stretched out wild and untamed in every direction, dotted with purple asters and golden blanket flowers that swayed in the wind like ocean waves. Samuel loved this land with a fierce devotion that most men reserved for women or whiskey, and he had never expected to find someone who seemed to love it just as much standing right there in the middle of his favorite meadow. She wore a simple cotton dress that had probably been blue once but was now soaked through to gray, and her hair hung in dark ropes down her back. An easel stood before her, somehow still upright despite the wind that threatened to tear it from the earth, and she worked with furious concentration, her brush moving across the canvas in quick, desperate strokes as if she could capture the storm itself. Samuel pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the meadow, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Any sensible person would have sought shelter long before now. The sky had been threatening for hours, and the first drops had started falling nearly 30 minutes ago. Now the storm was in full force, lightning splitting the sky in jagged white lines, thunder rolling across the plains like cannon fire. "Madam," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "Madam, you need to take cover." She did not turn around. Her hand kept moving, mixing colors on a palette she held in her other hand, adding bold strokes of gray and purple to whatever she was creating. Samuel dismounted, looping his horse's reins around a scrubby pine tree that offered almost no shelter, and strode into the meadow. The wildflowers brushed against his legs as he walked, their petals already being stripped away by the rain and wind. He could smell the ozone in the air, that sharp metallic scent that came right before lightning struck close. This woman was going to get herself killed for the sake of a painting. "Madam," he tried again, louder this time, coming up beside her. "This is dangerous. We need to move." She finally looked at him, and Samuel felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds themselves, gray and wild and full of the same untamed energy that he felt in this land. She was younger than he had first thought, probably not more than 22 or 23, with paint smudged across her cheekbone and rain dripping from her nose. "The light," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Look at the light." Against his better judgment, Samuel looked. The storm had created something remarkable, with the late afternoon sun still fighting through the clouds in places, sending down columns of golden light that illuminated patches of the meadow while leaving others in shadow. The wildflowers seemed to glow where the light touched them, brilliant against the darkness of the storm. It was beautiful in a raw, powerful way that made his throat tight. "I see it," he said, "but you will be dead if lightning strikes, and then it will not matter how beautiful it was." She smiled at him then, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to something that made his heart stutter in his chest. 5 more minutes. I just need 5 more minutes." "We do not have 5 minutes," Samuel argued, but even as he said it, he found himself standing beside her, watching as she worked. Her technique was bold and confident, nothing like the delicate watercolors he had seen society ladies dabbling with. She painted the way he imagined God might have created the world, with broad, decisive strokes that captured the essence of something rather than every precise detail. Thunder cracked so close that Samuel felt it in his bones, and the horse whinnied in fear. That was enough. He reached out and caught her wrist, stopping the brush in mid-stroke. "Now," he said firmly. "We go now." For a moment he thought she might argue, might pull away and keep painting until the storm swept them both away. But then she nodded, setting down her brush and palette with careful precision despite the chaos around them. "Help me with the canvas," she said. "I cannot leave it." The painting was still wet, the colors bleeding slightly in the rain, but Samuel helped her lift it from the easel. It was larger than he had realized, nearly 3 feet across. Together they carried it to where his horse waited, and Samuel used the oilcloth from his saddlebag to wrap it as best he could. "There is an outcropping about a quarter-mile east," he told her, raising his voice over the wind. "We can shelter there until this passes." She nodded, already collapsing her easel with practiced efficiency. She had clearly done this before, worked in conditions that would send most people running for cover. Samuel found himself wanting to know everything about her, this woman who painted in storms and looked at him with eyes that held lightning. They moved quickly, Samuel leading his horse with one hand and steadying the woman with the other as they hurried across the uneven ground. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Lightning flashed again, so bright it left spots in Samuel's vision, and the thunder came almost simultaneously. The woman did not flinch or cry out. She just kept moving, her hand tight in his, trusting him to lead her to safety. The outcropping was little more than an overhang of red rock, but it was enough to get them out of the worst of the rain. Samuel helped her up under the shelter, then secured his horse as best he could before joining her. They sat pressed together in the small space, catching their breath, water pooling around them. "That was foolish," Samuel said after a moment, wringing water from his hat. "That was necessary," she countered, pushing wet hair back from her face. "You do not understand. That light, that moment, it only existed right then. If I had not captured it, it would have been lost forever. Better lost than you dead in a lightning strike." She turned to look at him, studying his face with the same intensity she had given her painting. "You felt it, though. When you looked at the meadow at the light, you felt what I was trying to capture." Samuel could not deny it. He had felt something, some recognition of beauty that went beyond simple appreciation. It had touched something deep in him, the same thing that made him love this wild land, even when it was harsh and unforgiving. "I felt it," he admitted. She smiled again, and Samuel realized he would do just about anything to see that smile directed at him again. "I am Theresa Hammond," she said, offering her hand formally despite the absurdity of the gesture given their soaked condition. "Samuel Brennan," he replied, taking her hand. Her fingers were stained with paint in a rainbow of colors, the nails short and practical. "What are you doing out here, Miss Hammond? Lincoln is 10 miles away, and there is nothing but open range between here and there." "I am staying at the Henderson Ranch," Theresa explained. "Mrs. Henderson is my mother's cousin. I came west 3 months ago from Philadelphia to paint the landscape. Everyone back east thinks the West is nothing but dust and violence, but I wanted to show them the beauty. The wildness of it, yes, but the glory too. Philadelphia." That explained the slight formality in her speech, the way she held herself despite being soaked to the skin and sitting under a rock in the middle of a thunderstorm. But it did not explain the fearlessness, the way she had stood in that meadow painting while lightning split the sky around her. "You could have died," Samuel said again, unable to let it go. The thought of finding her struck down, those storm-colored eyes closed forever, made something clench in his chest. "But I did not," Theresa pointed out reasonably. "You came along and rescued me like something out of a penny dreadful. My hero in a weather-beaten hat." There was teasing in her voice, but warmth too, and Samuel felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with exertion. "I am no hero," he said gruffly. "Just a man trying to keep foolish women from getting themselves killed. Do you make a habit of it? Rescuing foolish women." "You are the first," Samuel admitted, and was rewarded with another smile. The storm raged on for another 20 minutes, the rain pounding down so hard it created a curtain of water at the edge of their shelter. They sat close together in the confined space, their shoulders touching, and talked. Theresa told him about Philadelphia, about the art academy she had attended against her father's wishes, about her determination to capture something true and real instead of the romanticized versions of the West that appeared in Eastern publications. Samuel found himself telling her things he rarely spoke about. How he had come to New Mexico territory 5 years ago after his parents died, seeking something he could not name. How he had worked on various ranches, learning the land and the cattle business, saving his money with the dream of one day having his own spread. How the violence in Lincoln earlier that year had sickened him, men killing each other over money and power while the land itself remained eternal and uncaring. "You love it," Theresa said softly. "The way you talk about the territory, the plains, the mountains. You love it the way I do." Samuel looked at her, at the way the fading storm light played across her face, at the paint stains on her fingers and the fierce intelligence in her eyes. "Yes," he said simply, "I do." "Then you understand," she said, "why I had to capture that moment. Why I could not just run for cover and let it pass unseen." He did understand, though it still frightened him how close she had come to danger. "Next time," he said, "perhaps you could wait until the lightning is not quite so close before you set up your easel. Where would be the drama in that?" Theresa asked, but she was smiling, and Samuel felt an answering smile tug at his own lips. The storm was moving east now, the thunder growing more distant, the rain easing to a steady patter. Samuel knew they should start back, get Theresa to the Henderson ranch before dark, but he found himself reluctant to move, to break this strange, intimate bubble they had created under the rock overhang. "Will you show me," he asked, "the painting?" Theresa's face lit up, and she carefully unwrapped the oilcloth from the canvas. The paint had set enough that it was no longer dripping, though the colors were still vibrant and wet. Samuel caught his breath. She had captured it perfectly, that moment when storm and sunlight met over the wildflower meadow. The painting had a raw energy to it that made him feel like he was standing there again, smelling the ozone and feeling the wind. "It is remarkable," he said honestly. "I have never seen anything like it." "It is not finished," Theresa said critically, studying her work. "The clouds need more depth, and the way the light hits the asters is not quite right, but the essence is there, the feeling of it." "The essence is perfect," Samuel assured her. They carefully rewrapped the painting, and Samuel helped Theresa mount his horse before swinging up behind her. It was the most practical arrangement, but it meant sitting with his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair beneath the rain and paint smells. She fit against him like she belonged there, and Samuel had to remind himself that she was a visiting Easterner who would return to Philadelphia eventually, not a woman who would stay in this wild land. The ride to the Henderson ranch took 40 minutes across terrain turned muddy by the storm. The sun was breaking through the clouds now, painting everything gold and amber, and Samuel saw Theresa turn her head constantly, taking it all in with those storm-gray eyes. She did not make idle conversation, did not chatter nervously the way some women might have. She just observed, present and aware of everything around her. The Henderson ranch was modest but well kept, a main house and a barn surrounded by corrals. William Henderson came out when he heard the horse approach, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw Theresa's bedraggled state. "Theresa, we were starting to worry. The storm came up so sudden. "I am sorry, Mr. Henderson," Theresa said as Samuel helped her dismount. "I went too far and got caught. Mr. Brennan here was kind enough to help me find shelter and see me home." William Henderson looked at Samuel with new appraisal, then extended his hand. "William Henderson, I appreciate you looking after her. My wife's cousin would never forgive me if something happened to Theresa while she was staying with us." "Samuel Brennan," Samuel replied, shaking the offered hand. "I was glad to help." "You will stay for supper," William said, making it less a question than a statement. "It is the least we can do, and it will be dark soon anyway. You can head back to wherever you are going in the morning." Samuel knew he should decline, should ride out despite the approaching darkness. But the prospect of spending more time in Theresa's company was too tempting to resist. "I would be grateful," he said. Mary Henderson proved to be a plump, practical woman who took charge immediately, sending Theresa to change into dry clothes and insisting that Samuel borrow some of William's things while his own dried by the fire. Supper was beef stew and fresh bread, simple but filling, and Samuel found himself seated across from Theresa at the rough wooden table. She had changed into a clean dress of pale yellow that made her eyes seem more silver than gray, and she had braided her hair while it was still damp, the dark rope hanging over one shoulder. Samuel forced himself to focus on his food rather than staring at her like a lovesick boy. "Samuel was telling me about the ranch he hopes to start," Theresa said to the Hendersons, and Samuel realized she must have been paying closer attention to his rambling under the rock overhang than he had thought. "Good land to be had if you know where to look," William said thoughtfully. "Tough living, but rewarding for a man willing to work hard." "I have been working as a ranch hand for the past 5 years," Samuel explained. "Learning everything I can, saving my money. Another year or two and I should have enough to buy some land and start building a herd." "A man with a plan," Mary said approvingly. "That is good to see. Too many young men drift through this territory without purpose." The conversation flowed easily through the rest of the meal, touching on everything from the situation in Lincoln to the summer drought to Theresa's painting. Samuel learned that she had been staying with the Hendersons for 3 months and planned to remain another 2 before returning east with a portfolio of western landscapes. "Though I keep telling her she should stay longer," Mary said fondly. "She has become quite useful around the ranch, and heaven knows the company is nice." "I have my commitments back in Philadelphia," Theresa said, but Samuel heard something in her voice, a hesitation that made him wonder if she was as eager to return east as she claimed. After supper, while Mary washed dishes and William went to check on the stock, Samuel and Theresa stepped out onto the porch. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the sky brilliant with stars in a way that only happened in the high desert after rain. The air smelled clean and new, like the earth had been washed pure. "Thank you again," Theresa said softly, "for today, for not laughing at me for painting in a thunderstorm." "I should thank you," Samuel replied. "I have been riding through that meadow for 3 years and never really saw it until today, not the way you showed it to me." Theresa turned to face him, leaning against the porch rail. "You could see it, though. That is what matters. Most people look at this land and only see emptiness, but you see what I see. The wildness and the beauty and the truth of it." "The truth of it," Samuel repeated slowly. "Yes, that is exactly right. This land does not lie. It is harsh when it needs to be, generous when it can be, but always true. Like the people who love it should be," Theresa said, and her eyes were locked on his now, intense and searching. Samuel took a step closer, drawn by something he could not name. "Are you true to what you are?" "I try to be," Theresa said. "It got me sent west when I refused to marry the man my father chose. the one who could not understand why I would rather paint than arrange flowers and pay social calls. He thought art was a pleasant hobby, not something to take seriously. His loss, Samuel said fiercely, surprised by his own vehemence. Your art deserves to be taken seriously. You deserve to be taken seriously. Theresa's breath caught, and for a moment Samuel thought she might close the distance between them, might rise on her toes and press her lips to his. But then William's voice called from the barn, asking about a loose board, and the moment broke like the storm clouds had earlier. I should help him, Samuel said reluctantly. And I should help Mary finish cleaning, Theresa agreed, but neither of them moved for a long heartbeat. Finally, Samuel forced himself to step back, to turn away and walk toward the barn. But he felt Theresa's eyes on him the whole way, and when he glanced back, she was still standing on the porch, bathed in lamplight and starlight, looking like something out of a dream. Samuel spent the night in the barn, bedded down in the loft with a wool blanket and his own racing thoughts for company. He kept seeing Theresa in his mind, standing in that meadow with rain streaming down her face and absolute focus in her eyes. He had never met anyone like her, someone who seemed to exist on her own terms without apology or compromise. The problem was that she was leaving. In 2 months, she would return to Philadelphia, back to her life in the East. And Samuel's life was here, in this wild territory that he loved. Even if he could afford to follow her, which he could not, he would wither and die in a city. He was as much a part of this land now as the wildflowers and the storms, but the thought of never seeing her again made his chest ache in a way he had not felt since his mother died. He woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and found Theresa already up, standing outside the barn with her easel set up, capturing the sunrise. She smiled when she saw him, and Samuel felt warmth spread through him despite the morning chill. You are going to ruin your reputation, painting at all hours in all weather, he said, coming to stand beside her. I will risk it, Theresa replied, her brush moving in quick strokes across a smaller canvas. The sunrise was indeed spectacular, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange and gold that seemed impossible even as Samuel watched them unfold. You ever sleep? Not when there is beauty to be captured, Theresa said. Then she glanced at him, mischief in her eyes. Though I could say the same to you. You were supposed to be a guest, not a ranch hand. I saw you helping William with repairs last night. Old habits, Samuel said with a shrug. My hands get restless when I am idle. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise and Theresa's painting of it take shape. Samuel wished he could freeze this moment, preserve it somehow the way Theresa preserved the world through her art. But time moved forward relentlessly, and eventually Mary called them in for breakfast. Over cornmeal and bacon, William extended an unexpected invitation. We could use another hand around here for the next month or so, he said to Samuel. The work is not fancy, just general maintenance and helping move some cattle, but if you are looking for employment, the job is yours. Samuel should have said no. He had a job waiting for him at the Double R Ranch 20 miles south, work that paid better and had better prospects. But he found himself nodding before he could think better of it. I would be grateful for the work. Mary beamed, and Samuel caught the knowing look she exchanged with her husband. Theresa kept her eyes on her plate, but Samuel saw the smile she was trying to hide, and his heart lifted despite his better judgment. So began the strangest and most wonderful month of Samuel's life. He worked alongside William during the days, mending fences and moving cattle, doing all the endless tasks that ranch life demanded. But every spare moment found him seeking out Theresa, watching her paint or riding with her across the rangeland to find new vistas to capture. She painted constantly, obsessively, as if trying to commit every inch of the territory to canvas. Samuel watched her work on rocky mesas as the sun set, in creek beds at midday, in fields of wildflowers at dawn. She taught him to see the world differently, to notice the play of light on stone, the way shadows moved across the grassland, the infinite variations of color in what he had always thought of as simple blue sky. And he taught her things too, without meaning to. He showed her how to read the weather by the feel of the wind, how to tell the difference between a deer track and an elk track, which plants were edible and which were poison. He taught her to ride better, to sit a horse like she was part of it rather than a passenger. He showed her his favorite places, the hidden valley where wild horses sometimes grazed, the natural spring surrounded by cottonwoods, the ridge where you could see 3 different mountain ranges on a clear day. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Theresa told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about the art academy where she had been one of only 3 women in a class of 30 men. She spoke of the frustration of being told her work was good for a woman, of having her paintings dismissed as charming rather than powerful. She described her father's disappointment when she refused to give up her art, to settle into the role of dutiful daughter and society wife. Samuel told her about losing his parents to cholera, about the rootless years that followed before he found his way west. He spoke of falling in love with the territory the moment he rode into it, of feeling like he had finally found where he belonged. He described his dreams for his own ranch, modest but solid, a place where he could work the land and watch the seasons turn and feel connected to something larger than himself. "You should paint it," he said one evening as they sat on a ridge watching the sunset. "The ranch you see in your mind. Show me what it looks like." Theresa looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. "I will, but you have to describe it to me, every detail." So Samuel painted with words while Theresa painted with oils, describing the house he imagined. Not large but well built, with a wide porch facing east to catch the sunrise. He described the barn and corrals, the creek that would run through the property, the meadow where cattle would graze. And Theresa brought it to life on canvas, her sure strokes creating something that looked more real than most photographs. When she finished, Samuel stared at the painting in wonder. It was his dream made visible, and seeing it like this made it feel possible in a way it never had before. "That is perfect," he said quietly. "That is exactly it. Then you will build it," Theresa said with certainty. "I know you will." They were sitting close together, shoulders touching, and Samuel became acutely aware of the warmth of her beside him, the scent of paint and sage that seemed to always surround her. He turned to look at her and found her already looking at him, something vulnerable and open in her expression. "Theresa," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "I know," she said softly. "I know, Samuel. You are going back to Philadelphia in a few weeks. You have your life there, your art, your future." "Yes," Theresa agreed, but the words sounded uncertain. "And my future is here. In this territory, on this land." "I know that too." Samuel reached out and took her hand, paint-stained fingers fitting perfectly with his calloused ones. "But I need you to know that this month has been the best of my life. You have changed how I see everything. I look at the sunrise now and I think about how you would paint it. I look at wildflowers and remember you standing in that storm. You have gotten inside me somehow, and I do not think I will ever get you out." Theresa's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You think I do not feel the same? I came west to paint the landscape, to capture something true, but I found more than I ever imagined. I found someone who understands why I stand in storms, who sees what I see when I look at this wild land. I found you." "Then stay," Samuel said, the words bursting out before he could stop them. Do not go back. Stay here with me. Samuel, I cannot just abandon my obligations. My family, my commitments, I know, he said quickly. I know I have no right to ask. I have nothing to offer you. I am a ranch hand with dreams and little else. You deserve someone who can give you a real home, security, a future. I do not want someone else, Theresa said fiercely. I want the man who understands why I paint in thunderstorms, the man who loves this land the way I do, the man who sees me as I really am, not as some society version of what a woman should be. Samuel's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. What are you saying? I am saying that I have been thinking, Theresa said slowly. There is no rule that says I must return to Philadelphia. I am of age, I can make my own decisions. And yes, I have obligations there, but perhaps I can fulfill them from here. I could send paintings back east, have them sold through galleries. It would be difficult, but possible. You would give up your life there. For this, Samuel gestured at the empty rangeland around them, beautiful but harsh and unforgiving. I would be giving up a life that never fit me properly for one that feels like it was made for me, Theresa corrected. I would trade stuffy parlors for open sky, polite society for true companionship. And I would be with someone who makes me feel alive in a way I never have before. Samuel pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. Theresa, are you certain? This life is hard. There will be lean times and rough winters. You would be giving up comfort and ease for struggle and work. I am certain, she said, and there was no hesitation in her voice. I have never been more certain of anything, except perhaps that I am completely in love with you, Samuel Brennan. The world seemed to stop, the sunset holding its breath, waiting. I love you, Samuel said, the words feeling inadequate for the enormity of what he felt. I love your courage and your passion and the way you see beauty everywhere. I love how you stand in storms and paint sunrises and look at this land like it is the most precious thing in the world. I love you. Then he kissed her, and she kissed him back, and it was better than any sunset or storm or wild vista. It was coming home, finding the missing piece, recognizing something that had always been meant to be. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, the stars were starting to appear in the darkening sky. We should tell the Hendersons, Theresa said, a laugh bubbling up. Mary has been giving me significant looks for 3 weeks now. I think she has been waiting for this. She is a wise woman, Samuel agreed, unable to stop smiling. They rode back to the ranch house together, Samuel's arms around Theresa, both of them giddy with joy and possibility. The Hendersons were on the porch when they arrived, and one look at their faces was enough. Well, Mary said with satisfaction. About time. You knew, Theresa accused, laughing. You have both known all along. Anyone with eyes could see it, William said gruffly, but he was smiling too. Question is, what are you going to do about it? I am staying, Theresa announced. If you will have me for longer than we originally agreed, I will pay my way, of course, help around the ranch, but I need time to establish myself here, to figure out how to support myself with my art. You will do no such thing, Mary said firmly. You will stay as our guest for as long as you need, though I expect you will have your own place before too long. She looked meaningfully at Samuel. I will build us a home, Samuel said, emboldened by Theresa's hand in his. It will take time, and it will be modest at first, but I swear I will give you everything I can. Then that will be everything I need, Theresa said simply. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and planning and stolen moments of joy. Samuel continued his work on the Henderson ranch while beginning to scout for land he could afford. Theresa wrote long letters to her family explaining her decision, knowing they would be upset but standing firm in her choice. She also wrote to several galleries in Philadelphia and Santa Fe, proposing arrangements to sell her work remotely. The responses were mixed. Her father's letter was cold with disappointment, though her mother wrote separately with reluctant understanding. But several galleries expressed interest in her Western landscapes, especially when they saw the paintings she sent as samples. There was a market, it seemed, for authentic depictions of the Western territories, particularly ones painted with Theresa's distinctive energy and vision. Samuel found a parcel of land 30 miles from Lincoln, near the town of Carrizozo. It was not large, just 160 acres, but it had good water and adequate grazing. The price was within his reach if he spent every penny he had saved over the past 5 years, leaving nothing for building or stock. But William Henderson made him an offer, a loan at fair interest that would give him the funds to start building a house and purchasing his first cattle. "You are taking a chance on us," Samuel said, moved by the man's generosity. "I am investing in family," William replied. "Mary and Theresa have grown close as sisters. That makes you family too, as far as I am concerned." By September, Samuel had filed his claim and begun breaking ground for the house. It was hard, back-breaking work, but he woke each morning with purpose burning in his chest. Theresa helped when she could, though Samuel worried about her working too hard. She just laughed at his concern and kept hauling water and mixing mortar alongside him. "I am stronger than I look," she told him, "and this is our home we are building. I want my hands in every part of it." The house took shape slowly, one board and stone at a time. It was simple, just 4 rooms to start with, but solid and well made. Samuel built the porch facing east just as he had described, so they could watch the sunrise together. Theresa helped him select the site for the barn, choosing a location that would be both practical and beautiful. They were married in late October in a simple ceremony at the Henderson Ranch. There was no fancy dress or elaborate celebration. Just Mary and William standing witness as a traveling preacher said the words that bound them together. Theresa wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Samuel had picked that morning. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I promise to love you all my days," Samuel said when it was time for vows. "To support your art and your spirit, to build you a home worthy of you, to honor the courage that brought you west and kept you here." "I promise to love you with everything I am," Theresa replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "To be your partner in all things, to see the beauty in every day we have together, to make a life with you that is true and wild and free." They moved into their unfinished house that night, sleeping on a bedroll under the stars because the roof was not yet complete. But Theresa did not complain. She lay curled against Samuel's side, his arm around her, looking up at the vast sweep of the Milky Way. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it." "Having second thoughts?" Samuel asked, though he could hear the smile in her voice. "Not a single one," Theresa assured him. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Samuel kissed her then, long and slow and sweet, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." "You already do," Theresa said. "Just by being exactly who you are." The winter that followed was hard but joyful. The house was finished by December, tight enough to keep out the worst of the cold. Samuel started building his herd with a dozen head of cattle purchased from William, and Theresa converted one of the rooms into a studio where she painted whenever the light was good. She had received a letter from a gallery in Santa Fe agreeing to represent her work, and 2 of her paintings had already sold for more money than Samuel made in a month of ranch work. "You are going to be the breadwinner in this family," Samuel joked when she showed him the bank draft. "We are partners," Theresa corrected firmly. "Your work with the cattle is just as important as my painting. More so, really. We cannot eat my art." But Samuel was proud of her success, loved seeing the joy on her face when she completed a painting she was particularly pleased with. She had found a way to support herself doing what she loved, and that was rarer than gold. They settled into the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of seasons and chores. Samuel worked from dawn to dusk most days, building fences and tending cattle and improving their land. Theresa split her time between helping with the ranch work and painting. She had a gift for seeing beauty in the everyday, capturing moments Samuel would have overlooked: the way ice formed on the water trough, the pattern of frost on winter grass, the play of shadow on the barn wall. She still painted in all weather, though Samuel had made her promise to take more care during lightning storms. He often came in from working to find her bundled in layers, easels set up in the snow, capturing some vista that had caught her eye. She was unstoppable, driven by a need to record everything she saw, and Samuel loved that about her even when it worried him. Spring came early in 1879, the desert blooming with renewed wildflowers. Theresa was beside herself with joy, painting constantly, trying to capture every species and color combination. Samuel helped her identify the different flowers, the Indian paintbrush and desert marigold and brittlebush, and she taught him their colors in painter's terms: cadmium red and golden ochre and titanium white. It was in April that Theresa told him she was pregnant. They had been married 6 months, and the news filled Samuel with a joy so intense it was almost frightening. A child, their child, a new life growing in this woman he loved. "Are you happy?" Theresa asked, watching his face carefully. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said, pulling her into his arms. "Terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Theresa repeated. And then she was crying and laughing at the same time, and Samuel held her while emotions washed through them both. The pregnancy was easier than Samuel had feared, though he hovered over Theresa like a nervous hen. She tolerated his concern with good humor, continuing to work and paint despite his protests. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am not fragile." She was right, of course. Theresa was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She faced the changes in her body with the same courage she faced everything else, documenting her growing belly in self-portraits that made Samuel's throat tight with emotion. Mary Henderson came to stay with them a month before the baby was due, bringing experience and calm competence. Samuel was grateful for her presence, especially as Theresa's time drew closer and his own anxiety grew. What did he know about babies or childbirth? What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? "You will not lose me," Theresa said firmly when he voiced his fears. "I am too stubborn to die in childbirth. Besides, I have too many paintings I still want to make." The baby came in late November, during a cold snap that turned the morning water to ice. Theresa's labor started at dawn and continued through the day and into the evening. Samuel paced outside the bedroom door, feeling useless and terrified, while Mary and a neighbor woman attended to Theresa. He heard her cry out once, a sound that made his heart stop, but Mary's voice came calm and encouraging through the door. Hours passed like years, and Samuel prayed to a God he had almost forgotten, bargaining everything he had for Theresa's safety. Finally, as midnight approached, he heard a new sound: the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Samuel's knees went weak with relief. Then Mary was opening the door, smiling, beckoning him in. Theresa lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face glowing. And in her arms was the smallest human Samuel had ever seen, wrapped in a blanket Mary had brought, with a wrinkled red face and tiny fists waving in the air. "Your son," Theresa said softly. "Samuel, we have a son." Samuel approached slowly, afraid he might break something, and looked down at his child. The baby had stopped crying and was making small snuffling sounds, his eyes squeezed shut. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Can I hold him?" Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Theresa smiled and carefully transferred the baby to his arms. Samuel cradled his son, marveling at how light he was, how delicate. The baby's hand opened and closed, and Samuel offered his finger, watching in wonder as tiny fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. "Hello," Samuel said. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to be worthy of you." "We should give him a name," Theresa said. "I was thinking Thomas Brennan." Samuel looked at her, then at his son, and nodded. "Thomas, it is perfect." They spent that night marveling at their son, taking turns holding him and watching him sleep, and adjusting to the reality that they were now parents. Mary stayed for 2 weeks, helping Theresa recover and teaching them both how to care for an infant. Samuel had worked with newborn calves and colts, but a human baby was an entirely different matter. Theresa healed quickly, her natural strength serving her well. By the time Mary returned to her own ranch, Theresa was up and moving around, though Samuel still worried about her doing too much too soon. She had not painted since Thomas's birth, and Samuel could see it gnawing at her, the need to create battling with the demands of new motherhood. "Paint," he told her one afternoon when Thomas was sleeping. "I will watch him. Go paint something." "I should not leave you alone with him," Theresa protested, but Samuel could see the longing in her eyes. "I am perfectly capable of watching our son sleep for an hour," Samuel said firmly. "Go. Paint. You need it." So Theresa went, setting up her easel on the porch to stay close to the house, and Samuel sat by Thomas's cradle, watching his son's chest rise and fall with each breath. The baby slept on peacefully, unaware that his very existence had changed the entire world for his parents. When Theresa came back in, there was light in her eyes that had been dimmed since the birth. She had captured the winter landscape in quick, sure strokes, the bare trees and brown grass and gray sky rendered beautiful through her vision. "Better?" Samuel asked. "Better," Theresa agreed, kissing him softly. "Thank you for understanding." They fell into a new rhythm, adjusting to life as a family of 3. Samuel's herd was growing slowly but steadily, and Theresa's paintings continued to sell in Santa Fe. Money was tight but adequate, and their home was filled with the sound of baby cries and laughter, and 2 people who had found exactly what they needed in each other. Thomas grew from a tiny infant to a robust baby who smiled at everything and everyone. He had Theresa's storm-gray eyes and Samuel's dark hair, and watching him discover the world was a joy that never faded. Theresa painted him constantly, hundreds of sketches and studies of her son in every pose and mood. "I want to remember every moment," she explained to Samuel. "He will only be this small once." By the time Thomas was walking, the ranch was starting to show real profit. Samuel had expanded the herd to 50 head, and William Henderson had connected him with buyers in Lincoln who paid fair prices. The house had been expanded with a 2nd bedroom and an expanded studio for Theresa. Life was good in a simple, profound way that Samuel had never imagined possible. They had been married for 3 years when Theresa told him she was pregnant again. Thomas was 2, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity who kept them both running. The news of another baby was met with joy and slight trepidation. They had finally gotten the hang of parenting 1 child, and now they would be starting over. Their daughter was born in May of 1882 during the height of wildflower season. The labor was faster this time, and by evening Samuel was holding his second child, a girl with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. "She is fierce," Theresa said fondly, exhausted but happy. "Listen to her. She is already demanding the world pay attention." "She takes after her mother," Samuel said, and Theresa laughed. They named her Catherine after Samuel's mother, and she was indeed fierce from the start. Where Thomas had been an easy, cheerful baby, Catherine was demanding and vocal, making her needs known at full volume. But she also had her softer moments, curling into Theresa's arms with absolute contentment, studying the world with serious eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and sometimes being more hindrance than help. But his sweetness with Catherine made Samuel's heart swell. They were a family, complete and whole. The years rolled on, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas showed an early aptitude for ranch work, following Samuel everywhere and asking endless questions about the cattle and land. Catherine proved to have her mother's artistic eye, forever bringing Theresa interesting rocks or flowers and asking to help with painting. Theresa's reputation as an artist continued to grow. A collector in New York had discovered her work and commissioned a series of paintings of the New Mexico territory. The money from that sale allowed them to buy additional land and improve their home further. They built a proper studio for Theresa, with north-facing windows that gave her the consistent light she needed. But success and comfort never softened Theresa's passion for the land. She still went out in all weather to capture moments of beauty, though Samuel had built her a small shelter on wheels that she could take with her to provide some protection from the elements. She still painted with the same fierce energy that had drawn him to her that day in the thunderstorm. Samuel watched her sometimes when she did not know he was looking, this woman who had changed his entire life. She would be standing at her easel, paint smeared on her face, hair escaping from its pins, completely absorbed in her work. And he would feel the same surge of love and gratitude that he had felt that first day, that this remarkable woman had chosen to stay with him, to build this life in this wild land. They had their struggles, of course. There were years when the drought made grazing scarce and they had to sell cattle at a loss. There were winters when illness swept through the territory and they huddled around their children, praying for health. There were moments of frustration when the work seemed endless and the rewards meager. But through it all, they had each other. They had the land they loved and the life they had built together. They had children who were growing strong and true, learning to appreciate both the practical necessities of ranch life and the beauty that surrounded them. By 1890, Thomas was 11 and already working alongside Samuel as a real partner rather than just a child helping out. Catherine was 8 and showing real promise as an artist, her childish drawings giving way to sketches that had genuine skill. The ranch was prosperous enough that they could hire seasonal help during busy times. Theresa's paintings were being shown in galleries as far away as Boston. They had built something real and lasting, exactly what Samuel had dreamed of that day. He first described his vision to Theresa. But it was better than his dreams because it was real, because it existed in 3 dimensions with all the complexity and challenge and joy that real life brought. Samuel was mending a fence one afternoon when he saw Theresa riding toward him across the rangeland. She sat her horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in the saddle, and the sight of her still made his heart lift. Some things never changed. She pulled up beside him, and Samuel immediately knew something was different. There was excitement in her eyes, the kind that meant she had discovered something extraordinary. "You have to come see," she said without preamble, Right now, leave the fence." Samuel did not argue. He mounted his horse and followed Theresa back across the range, curious about what could have excited her so much. She led him to the same meadow where he had first found her, the one where she had been painting in the thunderstorm all those years ago. The meadow was in full bloom, carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable. Samuel had seen it bloom many times over the years, but Theresa was right, this year was special. The flowers seemed denser, more vibrant, covering every inch of ground in a riot of color. "Look at it," Theresa said reverently. "I have been coming here for 12 years and I have never seen it like this. It is perfect." Samuel looked at the meadow, then at his wife, and made a decision. "Paint it," he said. "Just like you did that first day, paint it right now." "I do not have my supplies with me," Theresa protested. "Then we will go get them," Samuel said. "This matters. This is important." So they rode back to the house, collected Theresa's easel and paints, and returned to the meadow. The light was perfect, late afternoon sun slanting across the flowers, and Theresa set up with practiced efficiency. Samuel settled nearby to watch, like he had done countless times over the years. But this felt different, significant in a way he could not quite name. As if they were coming full circle, back to where it all began, Theresa painted with total absorption, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had been honing their craft for years. She was better now than she had been that first day, her technique more refined, her understanding of light and color more sophisticated. But she had lost none of her passion, none of that fierce need to capture the truth of what she saw. A rumble of thunder made Samuel look up. Clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. A storm was rolling in just like before. "Theresa," he said quietly. She looked up, saw the approaching weather, and laughed. "Again," she said with delight. "After all these years, it is happening again. Should we take cover?" Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. "In a minute," Theresa said, turning back to her painting. "I just need to finish the sky." So Samuel stayed beside her as the storm rolled closer, as the first drops of rain began to fall, as lightning flickered in the distance. He stayed as the rain increased, soaking them both, as thunder cracked overhead. And he stayed as Theresa made her final strokes, capturing the moment when storm met sunlight over a field of wildflowers. When she finally stepped back, both of them were drenched. But Theresa was grinning, rain streaming down her face, and Samuel started laughing. They were not young anymore. He was 34 and she was 33, but in that moment, they might as well have been back at the beginning. "I love you," Samuel said, having to raise his voice over the storm. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in this meadow, painting like the weather could not touch you." "I love you," Theresa replied, stepping into his arms, "for seeing me as I am, for building a life with me, for understanding why I stand in storms." They kissed in the rain, in the meadow where it all began, and Samuel felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was his life, this wild land and this wild woman and the family they had built together. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dared to dream. The storm passed as storms do, and they rode home together through the rain-washed evening. Thomas and Catherine were on the porch when they arrived, and Catherine immediately started scolding them for getting caught in the weather. "You are both soaked through," she said with the stern voice of a child imitating an adult. "You will catch your death." "We were being foolish," Theresa admitted, exchanging a smile with Samuel. "But sometimes foolishness is necessary." That night, after the children were in bed and they had changed into dry clothes, Samuel and Theresa sat together on their porch, looking out at the stars that had emerged after the storm. The land stretched out before them, dark and infinite and full of possibility. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Philadelphia, you could have been teaching at the academy by now or showing in the finest galleries." "I show in fine galleries from right here," Theresa pointed out, "and I would not trade this life for anything. This is where I belong, Samuel. With you, with our children, with this land. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "So am I," Samuel said, pulling her closer. "So am I." The years continued to unfold with all their joys and challenges. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years and survived lean ones. Thomas grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch with the same devotion Samuel did. And Catherine developed into an artist whose talent sometimes took even Theresa's breath away. They added to their family over the years another son, and then another daughter until the house was full of noise and life and love. The ranch prospered, growing from Samuel's modest dream into a substantial operation that could support them all. Theresa's paintings continued to evolve and mature. By the time she reached her 40th year, her work was being compared favorably to some of the finest landscape painters in America. But she never lost her connection to the land that had captured her heart, never stopped seeing the beauty in storms and wildflowers and open sky. Samuel watched his children grow and his wife's hair begin to silver and felt nothing but gratitude. They had built something precious here, something that would outlast them both. The ranch would pass to their children, and Theresa's paintings would hang in museums long after they were gone. But more than that, they had shown their children what it meant to live authentically, to pursue your passions, to build a life based on love and truth. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Theresa back to the meadow one more time. It was spring, and the wildflowers were blooming again, though not quite as spectacular as that one perfect year. But they were beautiful nonetheless, swaying in the gentle breeze. "I proposed here," Samuel said, though it was not quite accurate, or something like it, "the day I asked you to stay." "The day I knew I would never leave," Theresa corrected, taking his hand. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Samuel said. "First was standing in that storm painting when I rode by. If you had been sensible and taken cover, I might have ridden right past." Theresa laughed, the sound bright and free. "Then thank heaven for my foolishness." They stood together in the meadow, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was exactly what they needed. The land stretched out around them, wild and beautiful and true. And Samuel knew that whatever years remained to them would be good ones, because they would face them together. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as Samuel began to slow with age, though he still rode out most mornings to check the herd and mend whatever needed mending. Catherine had moved to Santa Fe to study art more formally, but came home regularly, bringing stories of the larger world that she had chosen to explore. Their younger children were finding their own paths, but they all carried the lessons their parents had taught them about perseverance and passion, and the importance of staying true to yourself. Theresa painted until her hands began to shake with age, and even then she sketched, unable to stop documenting the beauty she saw around her. Her later work had a different quality, more meditative and less fierce, but no less powerful. Critics spoke of her unique ability to capture the spirit of the American West, the wildness that was already beginning to disappear as civilization pushed ever further into the frontier. But for Theresa and Samuel, it was never about capturing something that was disappearing. It was about celebrating something that would always exist in some form, the raw beauty of the natural world, the courage it took to build a life in a challenging place, the love that could flourish when two people truly saw and accepted each other. On a morning in late May, 43 years after they had first met, Samuel woke to find Theresa already up and at her easel, painting the sunrise from their bedroom window. She had been doing this for weeks, a series of studies of dawn light that she said might be her final major work. Samuel watched her from the bed, memorizing the line of her profile, the way her silver hair caught the early light, the sure movement of her hands despite the tremor that plagued them now. They were both in their early 70s, slowed by age but not defeated by it. They still had each other, still had this land they loved, still had the family they had built together. "Come see," Theresa said without turning, and Samuel rose to join her at the window. The sunrise was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, illuminating the wildflowers that bloomed in the meadow beyond their house. It looked almost exactly like the painting Theresa had made that first day, the one that had been destroyed by rain before they could properly preserve it. But this was different, refined by decades of skill and life experience. "It is beautiful," Samuel said, his arm around her waist. "It is home," Theresa corrected softly. "Everything I ever needed right here." "Everything I ever needed is standing right here," Samuel replied, kissing her temple. "The sunrise is just a bonus." Theresa leaned into him, and they stood together watching the day begin. Two people who had found their place in the world in each other. The land stretched out before them, wild and eternal, and they were part of it now, woven into its story just as it was woven into theirs. Their grandchildren came to visit regularly, bringing new life and energy to the ranch. They ran through the same meadows Samuel and Theresa had walked, played in the creek that had never run dry, learned to ride horses and paint pictures and appreciate the wild beauty that surrounded them. They were the future, these children who would carry forward the legacy their grandparents had built. Thomas and his wife ran the ranch now with skill and dedication, and Samuel was proud of how his son had grown into a capable, thoughtful man. Catherine had become a respected artist in her own right, though she always said her mother's influence shaped everything she created. Their other children had scattered across the territory, pursuing their own dreams, but always returning home for important occasions. As the years advanced, Samuel and Theresa spent more time simply being together, sitting on the porch they had built 40 years ago, watching the seasons turn. They did not need to talk constantly. The companionship of long marriage meant they could be comfortable in silence, knowing that the other was there, knowing that they were exactly where they belonged. Theresa's last painting was completed on a morning in early autumn, when the air had just begun to carry the hint of winter's approach. She had painted the same meadow where Samuel had found her, but in this version, two figures stood together among the wildflowers, looking out at the storm that gathered on the horizon. It was their story, reduced to its essence, two people finding each other in the midst of wildness and choosing to stay together through whatever came. She titled it simply "Coming Home" and gave it to Samuel, refusing to sell it despite offers that would have been substantial. "This one is ours," she said firmly. "Our story. It stays with our family." The painting hung above the fireplace in their home, a constant reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Visitors always commented on it, drawn to the raw emotion captured in those brushstrokes, the sense of two souls recognizing each other across the wilderness. Samuel treasured it more than anything else they owned, because it showed how Theresa saw him. In the painting, he was not just a cowboy or a rancher. He was her equal, her partner, the other half of something that was complete only when they were together. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, a gathering that filled the house to bursting with noise and laughter and love. Someone suggested they renew their vows, and Samuel and Theresa stood together in the same spot where they had married half a century ago, speaking the same promises that had guided them through 5 decades of life. "I promise to love you all my days," Samuel said, his voice rougher with age but no less sincere. "To support your art and your spirit, to build you a home worthy of you, to honor the courage that brought you west and kept you here." "I promise to love you with everything I am," Theresa replied, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "To be your partner in all things, to see the beauty in every day we have together, to make a life with you that is true and wild and free." They were promises they had kept, Samuel thought as he kissed his wife to the applause of their family. Every single day they had honored those vows, and the result was a life rich beyond measure. The final years were gentle ones, free from major tragedy or hardship. They grew old together gracefully, taking care of each other as their bodies slowed but their minds remained sharp. Theresa could no longer paint for extended periods, but she sketched almost daily, small studies that captured moments of beauty. Samuel could no longer work the ranch, but he rode out most mornings, checking on the land he loved with eyes that had seen so much change. On a spring morning that could have been any morning from their long life together, Samuel woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the window. He turned to wake Theresa and share the beauty of the day, but she had gone ahead of him in the night, peacefully, leaving him with one last smile on her lips. The grief was enormous, a wave that threatened to drown him. But Samuel weathered it the way they had weathered everything else, by remembering what they had shared, by honoring what they had built together. Theresa had lived a full, rich life doing exactly what she loved. She had loved and been loved in return, had created art that would outlive them both, had raised children who were good and strong and true. The funeral was well attended, people coming from across the territory to pay their respects to the woman whose paintings had captured the spirit of the West. But Samuel barely noticed the crowd. He stood by the grave they had chosen together years ago, looking out at the meadow where wildflowers bloomed eternal, and knew that part of Theresa would always be there, in the land she had loved and painted with such fierce devotion. His children worried about him after Theresa's death, afraid he would fade without her. And it was true that the days seemed dimmer, the colors less bright. But Samuel carried on, because that was what Theresa would have wanted, what she would have expected. He spent his days among family and grandchildren, sharing stories of their life together, making sure that everyone knew the remarkable woman who had chosen to stay in this wild land. He lived another 3 years after Theresa's passing, years that were bittersweet but not without joy. He watched more grandchildren born, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's care, saw Catherine's career reach heights even Theresa might have envied. He spent long hours looking at Theresa's paintings, remembering the woman who had created them, the love they had shared. On an evening in early summer, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon and the scent of rain hung in the air, Samuel sat on the porch one last time. He was 81 years old and he was tired, but he was content. He had lived a good life, a true life, exactly the life he had wanted. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Samuel closed his eyes and thought of Theresa standing in the meadow with paint on her hands and lightning flashing overhead. He thought of the 53 years they had shared, the children they had raised, the home they had built together. He thought of her smile, her courage, her endless passion for beauty. And then, as gentle as the rain, Samuel Brennan went to join his wife, to wherever people went when they left this wild land behind. But their story remained, written in the ranch that bore their mark, in the children who carried their lessons forward, in the paintings that hung in galleries and museums, capturing forever the beauty of wildflowers in a storm and the two people who had found each other in the midst of it all. The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. Theresa's paintings grew more valuable with time, recognized as masterworks that captured a moment in American history when the West was still wild and full of possibility. But for those who knew the real story, the paintings were more than just art. They were a testament to what could happen when two people who truly saw each other decided to build a life together. The meadow where it all began still blooms with wildflowers every spring, and sometimes in the summer when storm clouds gather, you can almost see them there, a cowboy and a painter, standing together in the rain, choosing love and wildness and truth over safety and convention. Their spirits match the wild land they loved, and that land keeps their memory alive, season after season, year after year, forever.